Hello, in this video I want to explain why is there more Islamism today than 50 years ago during the Cold War. For example, in the 1970s, 80s, what happened in the last, roughly speaking, 40 years? Islamism, as defined by Henry Kissinger in his book The World Order from 2014, Islamism is an ideology that claims that in a geopolitical sense, Muslims should be loyal not to their nation state, which is the main geopolitical unit of our modern world, but to the idea of restoring the caliphate. And there are many violent versions of that ideology, like ISIS, Al Qaeda, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And what's also interesting, Henry Kissinger makes the case that Hassan al-Banna, this guy you see on your screen, is the first modern Muslim thinker that came up with this idea that the primer loyalty of all Muslims should be towards the caliphate and not towards the nation states. He was Hassan al-Banna. He was very angered by the British occupation of Palestine and by the Jews going there and also establishing their own state. But for the first time, he formulated his thesis in the letter written to the Egyptian king Farouk in 1947. And although Hassan al-Banna paradoxically was against violence, but okay, then as Kissinger points out, that begs the question, how are you going to restore the caliphate without violence? His successors were definitely pro-violence. Like Saib Qatib was one of his successors, and he was accused of trying to kill Nasser, the Egyptian dictator. But okay, in order to understand why Islamism is on the rise, we need to take a short look at Muslim history. So in the medieval period, especially in the early medieval period, this idea of all Muslims being loyal to the caliph or the caliphate was actually more stable, in a way even more progressive than the feudal anarchy of Europe. But then with the Mongols destroying the caliphate, okay, the Ottomans, one could say, they managed to bring back the glory to the Muslim world, and they restored the caliphate in a way. But already in the 16th century, Europe is beginning to become more powerful than the Ottoman Empire with the influx of gold from America. And then the final blow, after the failed 17th century siege of Vienna and generally the decline that the Ottomans were experiencing in the 18th century due to feudalism emerging there. Then the final death blow was nationalism, when nationalism became the mainstream ideology of the world. Roughly speaking, before World War One, just before World War One, the Muslim world was shattered into pieces, and the best example of this is the fact that many Muslim Arabs, not just the Christian Arabs, fought for the British against the Ottomans. And the German emperor even for a while falsely believed that when the caliph, when the sultan proclaims a jihad on the British, that all around the British Empire there will be Muslims fighting the British. But that didn't really happen. That didn't, not only did that not happen, but Palestinians, or I should say Arabs, were promised a Palestinian state if they fight for the British, which is why they did. And the Jews were promised the same territory, also by the British. And yeah, that's how all of this mess started. But the point is, even in the Muslim world, nationalism during World War One was proven to be stronger than their loyalty towards the caliph, or their let's say holy duties, as al-Banna would say, their duty towards Islam. They focused more on their national interest. Um, During World War II, also, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, as he was called, like the famous German general, he was seen as a liberator by many Muslims because he fought against the British, and Muslims were oppressed by the British Empire in the Middle East and in Egypt. The British control of the Suez Canal remained a problem until 1956. So yeah, in both world wars, Kissinger makes the observation Islam was kind of irrelevant because Muslims were fighting like for other reasons. They were fighting mostly. They fought either because anti-fascism, if they were on the side of communists, or they fought because of Arab nationalism and because Hitler promised them more freedom once he wins the war. And then Kissinger also makes an observation that once the Arab world, and more broadly speaking the Muslim world in the Middle East, so I'm also talking about the Iranians, once they gained their freedom from their colonial oppressors, they all started to attack each other, with like Saddam Hussein attacking Iran, then the Syrian-Jordan war. So essentially the same process that happened in the Balkan after they defeated the Ottomans, it happened in the Middle East. So one could say that the Middle East is kind of the Asian Balkan region, or at least Henry Kissinger makes that case. Also, interestingly, during the Cold War, the Arab world is also it adapts the logic of the Western world, or I should say of the it adopts the main split that was also present in the world, and that is Soviets versus America. So we had Iraq, Iran, and Syria being on the side of actually Iran only after the revolution, but Iran, Iraq, and Syria were Soviet allies, and Egypt, but only until Sadat makes peace with Israel. Yeah, and the US allies that were constant were Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and later Egypt. And prior to that, Iran, prior to the Iranian Revolution. So the Muslim world is split again. But actually, just like Tito in Yugoslavia, the Arab world actually profited quite a lot from the Cold War. Since they were non-aligned, they were able to get both sides to give them money in order to make the case like, you should join capitalism or you should join communism. You should join our bloc. And for example, the Aswan Dam was built in Egypt mostly by Soviet money. And due to that very beneficial geopolitical position the Arabs found themselves in, they were able to have economic growth, and they were able to make the case to their people that their nation states are legitimate because they're experiencing economic growth, their lives are becoming better. Then also wars with Israel, despite the Arab world losing them, as long as their leaders, the leaders of the Arab nation states such as Syria, Iraq, Egypt were against Israel, they were also perceived as legitimate by their nations. But after they make peace with Israel, often because they decided to view the interest of their nation as being more important than their holy duties as Muslims, which is what Sadat did, and which is what Henry Kissinger actually finds to be very good and beneficial for the Arab world. Well, Sadat then got killed by the jihadis, by the radicals, for betraying, as they would say, the higher cause. Or as Hassan al-Banna would say, he betrayed the Islamist principle of never going against the teachings of Islam. And yeah, Sadat got shot, And so Henry Kissinger argues two very important things changed in the 1990s, comparatively to the time prior to that. So the Arab world, roughly speaking, normalizes its relationship with Israel. Saddam Hussein was an exception, and then the Americans, let's say, took him out, like they killed him. But yeah, and because of that, the Arab dictatorships use their legitimacy, and also with the Cold War being over, they are no longer given a lot of help by the Soviets and by the Americans, and their economies start to stagnate. And yeah, there is a new surge in radicalism, like the Egyptian radicals, then they kill Sadat. But also the country that best captures this paradox that the Arab world finds itself in is Saudi Arabia, according to Henry Kissinger. Why is that? On the one hand, they are drawing their legitimacy out of their holy title. They happen to be like the House of Saud. It happens to be the guardian of the holy mosques, in the same way in which the emperors of the Holy Roman Empires were guardians of the Christian faith. So their legitimacy, the way they legitimize their rule over the surrounding tribes in Saudi Arabia, is essentially medieval. It is based in faith, but they also happen to be American allies, and their main source of income is oil that they sell to the unbelievers. And this paradoxical nature of the Saudi regime is further emphasized by them spreading Wahhabism and Islamism around the world, mostly actually in the areas that are being controlled by their Iranian adversaries. So they are financing Sunni fundamentalism and like jihadism or Islamism, as Kissinger would say, while Iran is doing the opposite. Iran is like sending weapons to the Shiite fundamentalists. But here is the paradoxical nature of both regimes and of the Arab world, more broadly speaking, or I should say even the Muslim world to an extent. So Saudi Arabia and Iran, in their foreign policy, they are pro-Islamism. But Islamism is this notion that sees the nation state as heretical, and it wants to restore the caliphate, go back to the old values of the Muslim world. And yeah, so essentially the terrorists like Osama bin Laden, they see the nation state itself being heretical. And yeah, so on the one hand, Saudi Arabia in its foreign policy is arguing against the nation state and then going back to its people and saying, we have the right to rule over you because we are a nation state. And Osama bin Laden, after attacking the Americans on 9/11, then also attacked the Saudis in 2003. And also a more recent event that further destabilized the Arab world was the Arab Spring. Many in the West hoped that now there is going to be a new spring of democracy and women's rights in the Arab world, but that power vacuum was then used by the jihadists that are and that were being sponsored by Saudi money and Iranian money. And yeah, so Kissinger ends his book or his chapter by saying that at the heart of the Arab world there is this paradox between the nation state and Islamism, and the Arab world needs to find a way to find somehow a balance between these two positions, which Kissinger believes is in the long run not possible, and he argues they should return to their more secular nation state legitimization of their rule. And the Palestinian issue, in Kissinger makes this point, is a good example of how some Arab countries are willing to normalize relationship with Israel because they see themselves primarily as nation states, while others, such as Iran, that see themselves as a, let's say, more of a nation with the holy duty of restoring the caliphate and following like the holy duties of Islam. The Iranians therefore argue against any kind of normalization of relationship with Israel. But also, quite ironically, the Iranians at the end of the day are also a nation state, just like the Saudis. So yeah, that paradox at the heart of the Arab world is destabilizing it in our time, and due to the factors that I mentioned, like the end of the Cold War, Saudi Arabia and Iran being engaged in a new Cold War, the Arab Spring happening, and normalization of relationship with Israel, all of those factors are destabilizing the Middle East, and more broadly speaking the Arab, and even more broadly speaking the Muslim world. Okay, if you like this video, don't forget to drop like, share and sub.